Today we're going to be covering a training about the mPulse, specifically tailored towards permanent jewelry. There are typically two configurations used with permanent jewelry, either the basic mPulse auto darkening lens, or ADL for short, or the upgraded ADL or auto darkening lens. There are benefits and so forth of having the upgraded, specifically since we can adjust this up and down. It has more lights in the back and a larger screen. And additionally, we can have it go up and down to adjust for different clients that are going to be using our product. We have a setup video, so we can walk through that in that video. So if you need to pause this and come back to it, that'd be perfect. So in the back of the machine, there's a switch on this back corner. Once we flip that on, it'll power up the machine. As you can see, now that I rotate this just a little bit, the welders is currently in an idle state. This is a very common concern for people, especially when they hit OK, and then they start doing some welding and then they see it again. Just to show this message again, now that it's grounded, I'm going to touch this, right? And now we can see that's in idle state again. So what's wrong? How do we get it out of an idle state? So we have a couple of controls here. We have our power setting, which is probably the most important thing that we're going to be focusing on today. Plus and minus for finer control. So if we want something a little finer, we can go, I want to go up or down one. Now this third button on the right, it looks like a power icon. When we click that, we can hear the audible beep. And then we can now touch our electrode and then it will start making welds. As you can see, when we do welds, this is going dark as well. Okay. So that is how we get it out of an idle state. So the next thing that we talk about is how this works, right? It's sending electricity through this electrode here, through our part, and then back into here. But when we start chatting about electricity, our clients and maybe perhaps you as the technician are getting concerned about, can this shock me? So right now I'm in a play state. I'm going to just crank it all the way up and just show you really fast. So I'm touching, right? It's only going to do that if I'm touching something that's metal, right? And the working distance for this, I'm going to turn it down to a little bit more of appropriate. This is going to be about as high as most of you would go. I'm going to put my hands really close to that spark, right? Even closer. So there's zero concerns for burning. I'm going to touch it right away, right? We're not concerned about those types of things. And then the next question is argon required? I have, and I'll just speak for other people that have reported in, argon is part of what this machine is. This is a micro-TIG, TIG standing for tungsten inert gas being argon in this case, welding. And argon comes out as a little tiny puff out of this cone, and it shields the electrode and the weld site from oxygen and other atmosphere gases. The resulting weld will be cleaner, it will have a smoother appearance, and for some metals it's required because of its negative reaction to oxygen. One thing that I would recommend if you're considering whether or not to do argon is to try without argon and see if you like the welds. If you're okay with an increased maintenance, because this will get dirtier faster, and you're okay with some of the post cleaning that you'd need to do on your jewelry, then that is something that would be your decision. So another concern is, what about our clients, right? There's going to be some bright flashes coming off of this spark. What do we need to do in order to protect their eyes? Now, In our jewelry kit, we offer some of this eye protection, right? If you want to get your own, this is a shade 5 or darker is what we recommend. Or you can just tell them to simply look away. Whichever works best for you. Sometimes we, as the operators, are doing it freehand, and so sometimes going through the art of darkening lens is not convenient for some users. So maybe we're using these glasses in order to see what we're working on. Or we can simply close our eyes or look away during the time of weld as well. Another common thing is getting to this. How many welds can we expect when we are welding with this? When do we do it? Now, this is a brand new electrode, but as we start welding, this will start getting less and less sharp. And it'll start getting black soot or maybe globs of metal from whatever welding that we're doing. So when in doubt, sharpen your electrode, but certainly when it's contaminated with metal or the tip has been taken off from bad welds or whatnot. Bad welds would consist of me sticking, right? And so why does that stick? So when we're learning for the very first time, we do one of two things. Either we touch, pull away, and if you listen, you can hear a double beeping sound. So what that's saying is that machine is saying, hey, I saw that you attempted a weld by touching that, but you're too far away now, so we're going to abort that weld. And then the opposite's true, where we get kind of flustered by pulling away too much, and then we push way too hard, and then we stick. The key component here, and the hardest learning curve, is that we want to, if we're either freehanding it or otherwise, we want to, and you can see I'm kind of propping my hands on the table, and then I'm going to be introducing it with just my fingers. That helps, especially if you have shaky hands or you feel like you're having some issues getting steady or consistent welds. So we want to just make soft contact, okay? In fact, let's get in a little closer. Now that we're a little closer, we can see what's going on here. So the idea is we want to make soft contact, right? Just barely enough contact to touch. You can see I pulled away a little bit. Even pulling away that much will abort the weld. So we want to make soft contact and then hold still. You can see that this electrode is going to pull back and it's going to do all that work for us. Right? Just soft touch. Now sometimes I've seen people where they're touching it like this. And that's not going to end well for us. It's going to bond quite effectively to our part, cause some contamination and so forth. Right? And so we don't want to hit the side like this. It's just going to cause a lot of issues with consistency. The other thing is that's important is we just want to touch the very tip of this. Just the very tip. And, be patient with yourself, because learning how to hold still for this does take a little bit of practice. So let's start working on chains. I have some popular style chain here. It is paperclip chain. Now, regardless of the chain that we're using, these principles apply to all of them. If we have anything that isn't circular in nature, it will usually land with the link next to it in like fashion on the short end. Commonly, let's see, just for the sake of being able to see this better, commonly people would like to cut their chain on the side here because it's convenient and it's easier to get to. But it is better to, in fact, cut it on the short end, like this. So we're going to make a cut right there. And then what that's going to allow us to do is, I'll line it up, is despite that cut, even with the cut there, it's hard to see that it's there. So after we do the weld, it will too be very difficult to see for the client, making it appear infinite and unbroken all the way across the wrist, ankle, or neck, respectively. So let's get into the proper technique of opening this up. So after we have it cut and exposed, it is important to twist these open. So we're going to do this motion. We're not going to try and pull it apart this way, because what happens is it will deform the chain if we try and pull it apart. Rather, we're going to twist it open like that. What's nice is this makes it very easy to, while it's on the wrist, hook that and have it completely out of the way. Then we can close that. So one of the top tricks that I would recommend, because sometimes when we're welding this, it will blow apart. So it'll create two balls on either side of this cut ring rather than forming together. And if that happens, it's not the end of the world. But this is one way that I can reduce that from happening. So I still have it open just a little bit. I'm going to pinch it closed just a little bit so it overlaps. So let's see if we can get that focused in. So it just overlaps just a little bit. So that when we close it, they kind of push against to one another. And that's going to help encourage this metal, or the two sides, to come together rather than fighting you the whole way. So let's bring in this electrode and do our weld. Silly me. These are customized pliers that I made, and you can do this with any tool that you want as long as we remove this paint. So I can clip onto there, and I've removed the paint on the inside of these pliers. So now I can use these as makeshift grounding pliers. And just like that, I give it a nice tug. So if I were to spin this a couple times, we'd have a hard time finding it even under magnification. Now I did overmelt this just a little bit, I apologize. But for those who are trying to spy it, it's right here. This link right here. Right there. The cool thing about this is most clients will have a much harder time finding your welds, because right now we've magnified this quite a bit, and this is slightly overmelted. On that point specifically, the next biggest question is, well, that's great, but how do I know which energy is the right energy for my project? Most chains in gold are going to be around, let's say 3, which is the bottom, and 8. Silver is going to require some modifications to the electrode that we'll cover here next, but it's somewhere between 8, and 15. Now, this is a generalized number for each. However, think of it as smaller the chain, smaller the energy. Bigger the chain, bigger the energy. If we want to identify what is the right energy for this, we can grab some scrap, or we can grab the end, cut it, weld it, and then adjust our energy until we get a 1 weld all the way through energy. At that point, we can note our screen and say, okay, that's was giving me the best results, and write that number on our bag of jump rings or a spool of chain. That way, if you have a partner or some employees, they know exactly what you expect for a given chain, be it silver, gold, or otherwise. So starting low and going up is the technique to find a good setting for your specific chain. Now, I mentioned silver is a little different, right? So silver is a little tricky because when it's melted and it's in a liquid state, it has, as I've been told, a high mobility, meaning it moves easier in a liquid state than other metals. So when it turned into liquid, it can blow up. And forgive the expression, it's not going to actually explode, but it's going to leave a hole in here rather than flowing the metal appropriately, or how you would expect from my previous example. So what we need to do is we need to go into our stylus here and remove our pen tool. Remove our electrode rather. And so if we were dealing with gold and silver, what I would recommend is that have a sharp side for our gold, flip it over, and have a blunt side for our silver. Now, if you're doing only gold, I'd sharpen both sides. That way you're working on someone, pull it out, flip it around, you have another sharp electrode to work with less downtime. So I'm going to sharpen this to a blunt so you can see the difference here. So we have a fully blunt, fully sharp, and then I'll show slightly blunt, fully sharp. So we have a brand new sharpened electrode. Flip it around to our silver side. Now we have a blunted electrode. You can see this shiny flat surface on it. Now, how much you blunt it is up to you. I feel like the higher energy I go, the more I need to blunt this tip to help spread the energy out just a little bit so we don't leave gaps or divots in our silver and we get those nice smooth welds that we're hoping to see. So sharp, and we can just sit this in here. There you go. So here's the fun thing with setting this, a lot of questions. We have this nose cone here that we just pulled off, and we have this collet nut that holds the electrode in. So if we rest the back of this against the piece here, we can scoot that electrode up into the space, and what we're looking to see is that electrode fitting within those two grooves. Once it is, then we can tighten that up, meaning this nut, and then when we slide this back in and it clicks into place, that's going to be sticking out appropriately far every single time. And if it's within this groove, when you're resting it and trying to measure it out, it's going to be perfect every time. So what happens if things don't go our way, right? We have our jump ring, our chain, it's closed up, but we introduce our electrode, and then this happens, right? Worst case scenario, oh no, our jump ring is ruined, right? Not so. It's less ideal, but that's not the end of the world. We can bring in our pliers. We can pinch those guys together. Okay. Making sure that they're touching. Nice and snug. Again, we're going to bring in our electrode right in between and perpendicular. See, even I'm messing up. So we can employ my strategy, extending that bend just a little bit, so that when we twist it shut, they're in tight contact. And there we go. And even with all those welds, close it up, and it is barely noticeable under magnification. Right? Still strong tug, still strong. All right. So some of the most common metals that we're going to be using in our permanent jewelry business is you have your gold. We have, our silver rather. We have our gold. And then perhaps on an economical line, we can have stainless steel. Now there's something in this pile that I don't have with me, is gold fill. So let's explain a little bit about what's going on with gold fill. Gold fill is a little misleading because it's gold plated, filled with anything that the manufacturer decides to use for their fill portion of that jewelry. So when we're doing our welding, we're not actually welding gold at that point. We're welding whatever they've decided to put inside or underneath the gold that we see. This can cause some problems because the fill portion is not regulated. It can be anything that they want. And so some metals weld well, some metals do not. So I suggest if you're starting this up and you're finding a new vendor, to get a small sample from them first, making a few welds to see if you like the results. If you like the results and they end up being good, great. People say, well, which one do you like? Well, I've welded gold fill and it turned out pretty well. And I've welded gold fill that didn't weld at all. And so I think with this permanent jewelry business coming off pretty strong, that I think some of these gold fill manufacturers are catering their fill to be compatible. But I would just double check with your vendor just in case. Why gold fill? Well, gold fill typically is a lot cheaper than gold. And so we can cater to our clients if they want gold and make them very happy. One of the things that we need to keep in mind, however, is when we weld this gold fill jewelry, we're actually going to blow off all of the gold or mix it with the under metal so that you can tell where we've welded. And no amount of polishing or anything is going to remove that. So what do we do next? Either we follow some of the principles that I showed you while welding the stainless steel chain, so we can hide it to the link next to it, or we can employ a solid gold jump ring to join our pieces. Deciding on whether or not to do that is up to you individually. However, it is a recommended alternative to having those welds be visible. So I get this sometimes as well. So how small can we go? Honestly, this chain right here is the smallest I would ever go. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. Right? That is the smallest I would ever go. It is very, very small. So what I'd recommend is finding what is worth it for you, because you may be able to do it, but it may be tedious or difficult, so that you're with the client too long and it might taint the experience. But as far as capability, this is probably the limit right here. So, and that's with gold and silver. It's just there's a lower limit, and that's based off of how low our power can go, which is 3. All right. So silver, because of our blunt electrode required for silver welding, is going to require more energy. So this is a fairly sized silver chain, right? So with this particular silver chain, why I'm putting my up to my finger so you can kind of see how big it actually is. Let's see the sideways profile. So I'm using 17 watt-seconds, or WS, as it's shown on the screen. And so I'm going to come in perpendicular to that weld site, and I might have to do a couple just to smooth this out. Maybe not. I'll do one more. I always do a feel. If it feels rough, then our client's going to feel that too. Okay. That feels pretty good. I might do one more right here. And so with silver, one thing is it's always going to leave a little bit of that black soot, but you can see I can just wipe it off with my fingers. Another smart thing to do, just to make the client feel good, is I grab my pliers and I wiggle that back and forth, showing that it's not going to break on them. And that's ready to go. During this whole video, you've noticed that whenever I ground something, right, let's throw it right here. So whenever I've grounded something that I'm going to weld, I don't ground it down here, right? I don't even ground it up here. I grab it always on the link that I'm welding on. The reason being is everything associated with this is about electricity. And as I wiggle this back and forth, you can see how inconsistent those connections between the links can be. So if there's an inconsistent path of electricity, there's going to be an inconsistent weld. So if we grip it on the very tip, or the very link rather, of the one that we're working on, one, it's easier to work with, and two, we get a consistent weld between welds. Now, this is just one example. Sometimes we're working with smaller stuff, right? So I have some tweezers here that I've removed the paint off the back here. And now, perhaps this is a little bit more appropriate for grabbing something like this. So let's say I want to weld this link right up here. Sure. So now I can make a weld right there, because I'm not relying upon all the links in between. That electrical connection is sure. So it doesn't have to be tweezers. It can be your favorite pliers, which is why I made these into some grounding clips for me. I like them. They also engage my whole hand, so when you're doing tweezers, you're doing this motion, it can wear you out. So find what you like. Just because I